There's a pull, isn't there? The idea of finding something that will change your life forever. A fortune hidden just beyond reach. A treasure so vast it could make you a king or ruin you trying to claim it. There's an old story, one we've seen play out time and time again, from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Tibet. Humanity has always been chasing the glittering promise of wealth and power. But nowhere is that story more alluring or more tragic than in the dense, untamed jungles of South America. This is the story of El Dorado. For centuries it was whispered on the lips of adventurers and conquistadors, each retelling and adding a new layer to the legend. To some, it was a man, a king who bathed in gold. To others, it was a city, a paradise of wealth hidden in the heart of the jungle. And for the truly ambitious, it became a dream. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares. To understand the legend of El Dorado, we have to go to its heart. Deep within the Andes Mountains, high above the valleys of what we now call Colombia, lies a lake. It's small, almost hidden from the world, but its importance can't be overstated. Lake Guatavita. This wasn't just a body of water for the indigenous Muisca people. No, to them it was far more a sacred place, a portal between the earthly realm and the divine. It wasn't simply a lake, it was a place where the living met the gods. Imagine, if you will, the scene. A mountain air is thick with the smell of burning incense, herbs and the fragrance of flowers used in sacred rituals. The sky is pale and the sun is just beginning to set. It casts a golden hue over everything. The valley is alive with the sound of drums, their rhythm echoing off the mountain sides, a steady pulse that feels like a heartbeat of the land itself. In the middle of the lake, a raft floats quietly, barely disturbing the water. The raft is simple, made of reeds, but its surface is covered with offerings, golden figurines, intricate jewellery, polished emeralds that glitter like the eyes of the gods themselves. The Muisca people believe that those treasures offered in honour of their deities will ensure harmony between the people and the forces that govern life. And standing at the centre of this raft is the new chief, a man whose very presence seems to shimmer with power. You see, his skin glistens with a fine dust of gold, and in that moment it seems as if he's transformed, a living incarnation of the God that rules over the land. This is his moment, you see, a baptism. But it's not just for him, it's for the people he's come to lead. They watch from the shores, reverent and silent, as he prepares to perform the sacred act that will mark his passage from the mortal to the divine. With a deep breath, he leaps from the raft and plunges into the waters of the lake. The gold dust, like 1,000 tiny sunbeams, is washed away by the clear waters, sinking to the bottom in a swirl of light. It's a moment of purification, a connection between the physical world and the spiritual realm, and as the gold disappears beneath the surface, his attendants follow. They cast treasures, more gold, gemstones and intricate artifacts into the lake, offerings to the gods who dwell beneath. All the while, the drums echo louder, their rhythms now call to the divine. This was a sacred ritual, a communication with the gods, a way to ensure favour and prosperity for their people. It was a blend of devotion, art and reverence, a ritual so powerful it became for the world of theirs and beyond. But for the Spanish, those actions were viewed through a very different lens. They saw something entirely different, a treasure trove waiting to be uncovered, a key to riches that could fuel their empires and their desires for power. And so, when the first Spanish explorers arrived, they were already in search of gold, driven by the stories they'd heard of the wealth in the New World. They crossed an ocean, had braved disease and death and conquered kingdoms. They weren't seeking riches, they were hunting for something more. An empire of gold that would solidify their place in history. The stories they heard about the people that lived in these foreign worlds, about the golden man and about the sacred lake, seemed like a perfect opportunity. In their minds, the lake wasn't sacred. It was simply a reservoir of riches, a hoard of gold waiting to be taken. But the legend of El Dorado was not just about gold, it was about something deeper. And the Spanish would soon learn that the cost of seeking the gold would be far more than they could ever have bargained for. The first Spanish conquistadors to seek out the lake's secrets was a man by the name of Hernan Perez de Quesada. He wasn't alone, you see. He brought an army of men with him, along with tools and machinery designed to drain the lake of its wealth. They were convinced that if they could just remove enough water, they could discover the fortune unlike anything they had ever seen. It's easy, in hindsight, to see the tragedy of their pursuit. The local people saw the lake as a place of spiritual significance, a connection to the divine. They didn't see it as a means to wealth or power, but the Spanish, it was a symbol for them, one thing they valued above all else, and that was gold. And so the story of El Dorado, a myth born from its sacred ritual, slowly transformed into something far darker. The idea of a golden man became a golden city, a city of unimaginable riches, hidden deep within the jungle. A place that could offer not only gold, but the power to reshape the world. But as we know, as history often shows, the deeper one digs in the pursuit of such power, the more it costs. The search for El Dorado and the obsession for the wealth that it promised left a trail of death, destruction, and disappointment. And so when the tales of the golden man spread, a chief bathed in gold dust, and a lake filled with treasure, it didn't matter to them that these stories were tied to rituals. They didn't pause to consider the cultural significance of a place of Lake Guatavita. No, to them, it was simply a vault that was waiting to be emptied. The idea was simple: remove enough water and the riches would eventually surface. The gold would therefore be theirs. But there was a problem, a big problem. Lake Guatavita wasn't a simple pond easily drained with a few buckets. It was a vast, deep reservoir nestled high in the Andes. Its waters held within steep cliffs and no easy way to lower its level. But the conquistadors didn't care about the limitations of the land. To them, the gold was too valuable to be left behind. So they tried and tried again. But the project was doomed. The indigenous workers forced into labour were subjected to back-breaking work. They hauled water, building trenches, and attempted to drain the lake that seemed determined to remain full. The steep sides made it nearly impossible for them to dig effectively, and no matter how hard they worked, the lake stubbornly refused to surrender its secrets. They didn't get far. And yet, Perez didn't give up. He pushed forward with his plan, convinced that the riches of El Dorado were just beyond the horizon. If only they could get the water to move. But the harder they worked, the more impossible the task seemed. The jungle fought back with the same intensity as the lake itself. The relentless tropical rains, the unforgivable landscape, and the sheer scale of the project all worked against them. It was like trying to empty an ocean with a spoon. But what Perez failed to realise was that most of the conquistadors couldn't fathom was that the gold, real gold, wasn't the point of the ritual. You see, for the people, the lake wasn't a treasure chest waiting to be plundered. It was a sacred space and a connection between the mortal and the divine. The gold that was offered to the lake was never meant to be possessed by men. It was meant to return to the gods. But here's the thing. The more the Spanish searched, the more El Dorado slipped away from them. It became something unreachable, something that could never be captured, and still they couldn't stop. Eventually, they gave up, and the Spanish left in disappointment. But the legend didn't end. The storybook of El Dorado took on a life of its own, and a life that spanned centuries. Centuries later, engineers with more advanced tools, more power, they tried again. They built channels, blasted trenches, and lowered the water level dramatically, thinking that their modern techniques would finally bring the golden city to light. But the lake fought back again. Floods, landslides, bad luck. The forces of nature seemed determined to protect the lake, keeping its secrets hidden. Even with their advanced equipment, the engineers were thwarted at every turn. It was as if the lake itself had become a guardian of the myth, a protector of what lay beneath the water. By the early 20th century, the lake had been left to its secrets. Most of the gold recovered was small ceremonial items. Beautiful, yes, but far from the unimaginable wealth the Spanish had ever dreamed of. And yet by this time, the legend of El Dorado had already taken on a life of its own. The story had evolved. It became something greater than the lake or the treasures that it might have hidden. That's the thing about legends, isn't it? They don't stay the same. They grow, they change, they adapt. What started as a story of a golden man drenched in gold dust and offering treasures to the gods became something much bigger. It became a story of a golden city. A golden city hidden deep in the jungle. A paradise untouched by time or man. Its streets, they said, were paved with gold and palaces gleaming in the sun, radiant and vast, overflowing with wealth. A place so rich that even the stones were said to be glittered with jewels. The legend stretched and morphed and transforming into an almost mythical utopia, a land that held everything the Spanish conquistadors desired. And for the men who heard the story, the question wasn't whether the city existed, it was how far they were willing to go to find it. For some, the answer was anywhere. Take, for example, Francesco de Orellana. He was one of the first Europeans to navigate the Amazon River, and his journey in 1541 would come to define a portion of the El Dorado myth. His journey wasn't so much an exploration, it was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to find the golden city that had captured so many imaginations. Starving, surrounded by hostile tribes and treacherous terrain, Orellana and his men drifted down the Amazon River, clinging to the hope that somewhere ahead the golden city awaited them. But as so often happens in these stories, they found nothing. No golden city, no treasure, just the endless suffocating jungle. And yet, by Orellana's accounts, the journey added fuel to the fire of El Dorado's legend. He spoke of wealthy tribes living along the river, vast untamed landscapes, and the promise of something extraordinary, just beyond reach. In his mind, the city was still out there, waiting to be discovered, but for Orellana and his men, it remained just that, a promise. And so the myth endured. The golden city of El Dorado continued to slip through the fingers of every man who sought it, becoming something that could never be found. But that only made it more powerful and more irresistible. The more elusive it became, the more desperate the search grew. In the pursuit of El Dorado, there were many who lost their way. They became consumed by the idea, their ambition warping into something darker, something terrifying. But no one embodied the madness of El Dorado quite like Lope de Aguirre, a man whose name would be whispered with fear in the jungles of South America. In 1561, he set out on an expedition down the Amazon River, following the same dream as Francisco de Orellana. But where Orellana had clung to hope, Aguirre clung to something else. He wasn't just seeking gold, he was seeking power. At first, he seemed like just another conquistador, chasing a legend. But as the expedition moved deeper into the jungle, something began to twist inside him. His ambition curdled into paranoia. He started to see enemies everywhere, real or imagined. The men who followed him, once allies, now appeared as threats to his vision or power. It didn't take long for him to take control. He led a mutiny, he killed the expedition's leader in cold blood, declaring himself a new ruler of the empire. He wasn't just a man hunting for gold anymore. He was a king, crowned by his own madness. What followed was a descent into chaos. The men who had once been loyal to Aguirre now trembled in fear, his vision fueled by terror. Anyone he suspected of betrayal was executed on the spot. He ruled with an iron fist, and his men, starving and terrified, began to turn on each other. It was a bloodbath, an empire built on the foundation of insanity. By the time Aguirre was captured, he was a shell of a man who had once set out with dreams of riches and glory, and yet the legend didn't die with him. Where he had failed, his empire never materialized. His dream of El Dorado shattered by his own madness, but the idea of the Golden City, the dream of El Dorado, it lived on. In the 17th century, the story of El Dorado took on new forms. Explorers continued to chase the myth, convinced that somewhere hidden beneath the jungle's thick canopy laid a city of unimaginable wealth. Maps began to include a place called Lake Guatavita, a vast shimmering body of water that supposedly held the key to the fabled city of Manoa, the new heart of the El Dorado legend. And with that came another wave of explorers, each one chasing the same dream, each one doomed to fall short. And yet, what if it wasn't entirely a myth? You see, recent archaeological discoveries in the Amazon suggest that the jungle may have been home to advanced civilizations. Vast networks of roads, earthworks and settlements have been unearthed, hinting at societies far more complex than previously believed. Could these have inspired the stories of El Dorado? Or maybe El Dorado was never about gold at all. Maybe it was about something deeper, the human need to believe that somewhere out there lies a paradise waiting to be discovered, a utopia. But here's the truth, chasing paradise also often comes with a cost. For the explorers who sought El Dorado, their cost was their lives, their sanity, and sometimes their very souls. El Dorado may have never existed, but its story still lingers, reminding us of the fine line between dreams and delusion. Studies of Lake Guatavita in the 20th century confirmed the presence of gold items, but found no evidence of vast treasures. This further supported the idea that El Dorado was a ceremonial practice rather than a physical city. For some, researchers speculate that while El Dorado was a golden city that may not have existed, ancient advanced civilizations in the Amazon could have inspired parts of the myth. Archaeological studies that have found these earthworks and settlements have also suggested that the region was more populated than previously thought. Legends persist that El Dorado may still exist, not as a literal city, but as a metaphor for hidden civilizations. Some believe that El Dorado is still out there waiting to be found. Thanks for joining us on our journey, and if you've enjoyed today's episode of Podcast Folklore, please be sure to follow us, leave a review, or maybe share your thoughts. Who knows, maybe somewhere out there the city of gold is still waiting, and as ever, continue to explore the world with wonder.